March 15, 1927, 10:32 p.m. Vincent Vinny. Marcello stood behind the mahogany bar of the Golden Door, Chicago's most elegant jazz club, and made a decision that would cost him everything. He poured the last bottle of Al Capone's bootleg whiskey down the drain. The amber liquid swirled and disappeared, and with it, Vinny's future. "You sure about this, boss?" asked Tommy Chen, the club's head. "And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell." Bartender, watching nervously as $200 worth of Canadian whiskey vanished into Chicago's sewer system. "Dead sure," Vinny replied, his jaw set. "I'm done being Capone's puppet." To understand why this was the worst decision of Vinny Marcello's life, you need to understand Chicago in 1927. Prohibition had been the law for 7 years, but Chicago ran on illegal alcohol like a car runs on gasoline, and Al Capone controlled 75% of the city's bootleg supply. Every speakeasy, every nightclub, every basement bar that wanted to stay in business bought from Capone. It wasn't a choice, it was survival. The Golden Door wasn't just any nightclub. Vinny had opened it in 1924 on the corner of State and Division, right in the heart of the near North Side. 3 floors of pure elegance, a street-level restaurant that served legitimate food, a second-floor jazz lounge where Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong had played, and a third-floor speakeasy that Chicago's elite visited when they wanted to pretend they weren't breaking federal law. Vinny had done everything right. He'd paid off the right cops. Sergeant Patrick O'Malley got $500 every month to look the other way. He'd hired the best musicians, the prettiest cigarette girls, the most discreet waiters. By 1927, the Golden Door was pulling in $15,000 a week, which meant Vinny was clearing about $3,000 after expenses, bribes, and payroll. But there was a problem. Every week, a man named Jack Machine Gun McGurn would arrive with a truck full of Capone's whiskey. And every week, McGurn would charge 30% more than the market rate. Capone's booze wasn't even good. It was mostly industrial alcohol mixed with juniper oil and caramel coloring. Harsh stuff that burned going down and gave customers headaches the next morning. But Vinny paid because everyone paid. That was how Chicago worked. Then, 3 weeks earlier, Vinny had met someone who changed everything. His name was George Remus, the famous bootlegger from Cincinnati who'd just gotten out of prison. Remus was in Chicago on business, and he'd come to the Golden Door because he'd heard it was the classiest joint in town. Vinny and Remus had talked for hours that night. Remus explained how he'd built his empire, not through violence like Capone, but through legitimate business. Remus bought distilleries legally, claiming he was making medicinal alcohol, which was legal under the Volstead Act, then stole his own whiskey and sold it on the black market. It was brilliant, profitable, and relatively bloodless. "You don't have to be Capone's cash register," Remus had told Vinny. "There are other suppliers, better suppliers. I can connect you with a Canadian outfit that smuggles the real stuff across the Detroit River. Premium whiskey, scotch, bourbon, rye, whatever you want, and they'll charge you 40% less than what Capone's charging." Remus had written a name on a napkin, Samuel Bronfman. He runs a distillery operation in Montreal. His whiskey crosses the border every night. Tell him Remus sent you, he'll take care of you. That conversation had planted a seed in Vinny's mind. Why was he paying Capone's inflated prices for inferior product? The Golden Door was his club, his business, his dream. He'd built it from nothing, and now some greaseball gangster was bleeding him dry. So Vinny had made a phone call. He'd contacted Bronfman's people in Detroit. They'd sent a representative, a quiet Canadian named Maurice, who'd brought samples. Real Canadian whiskey, smooth as silk, aged in oak barrels. The kind of stuff that made Capone's Rotgut taste like paint thinner. The deal was simple. $12 per case instead of Capone's $18. Same delivery schedule, better product, bigger profit margins. Vinny would save $300 a week, which meant an extra $15,000 a year in his pocket. Vinny had shaken Maurice's hand. "I'm in." "What about Capone?" Maurice had asked. "Let me worry about Capone," Vinny had replied with more confidence than he felt. That was 3 weeks ago. Now, standing behind his bar, pouring Capone's whiskey down the drain, Vinny felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. Tomorrow, Maurice's truck would arrive with the first shipment of Canadian whiskey. Tomorrow, Vinnie Marcello would be his own man again. What Vinnie didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Jack McGurn had an informant inside the Golden Door. And that informant, a dishwasher named Sal Pisano, who Vinnie had hired 6 months earlier out of kindness, had already made a phone call. By midnight, Al Capone would know about Vinnie's betrayal. And Al Capone didn't forgive betrayal. March 16, 1927, 9:15 a.m. Al Capone sat in his fourth-floor office at the Lexington Hotel, smoking a Cuban cigar and listening to Jack McGurn explain how Vinnie Marcello had just made the biggest mistake of his life. "He dumped it," McGurn said, pacing in front of Capone's massive oak desk. "All of it, 20 cases, poured it straight down the drain." Capone didn't react immediately. He took a slow drag on his cigar, exhaled, and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. At 28 years old, Capone was at the peak of his power. He controlled Chicago's South Side, most of the North Side, and had interests in bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution that generated an estimated $100 million a year. Forbes magazine had recently listed him as one of the most influential people in America, though they'd carefully avoided mentioning how he'd earned that influence. "Tell me about Marcello," Capone said quietly. His voice was always quiet when he was angry. The shouting came later. McGurn consulted a small notebook. "Vincent Marcello, born 1889 in Naples, came to Chicago in 1907. Worked as a waiter, saved his money, opened the Golden Door in 24. No criminal record, no gang affiliations, pays his bribes on time. By all accounts, he's a legitimate businessman trying to run a legitimate club." "Except for the speakeasy on the 3rd floor," Capone noted dryly. "Except for that," McGurn agreed. "But boss, here's the thing. He's buying from the Bronfman outfit. Canadian whiskey coming through Detroit. That's Purple Gang territory." Capone's eyes narrowed. The Purple Gang controlled Detroit's liquor smuggling from Canada. They were Jewish, ruthless, and independent. Capone had a business relationship with them. They supplied some of his higher-end products, but it was a tense relationship. The Purple Gang didn't take orders from anyone. "So Marcello thinks he can cut me out and buy direct from the Canadians," Capone said. "That's what it looks like." Capone stood and walked to the window. From 4 floors up, he could see State Street bustling with morning traffic. Cars, trolleys, pedestrians hurrying to work, all of them moving through a city that Capone effectively owned. Every 3rd cop on that street was on his payroll. Every 5th politician in City Hall answered his phone calls. The mayor himself, Big Bill Thompson, had accepted $250,000 in campaign contributions from Capone's organization. "You know what this is about, Jack?" Capone said, still looking out the window. "This is about respect. Marcello thinks because he runs a fancy club with jazz bands and white tablecloths, he's better than us. He thinks he can make deals behind my back." "Want me to pay him a visit?" McGurn asked. His reputation as Capone's chief enforcer was well earned. McGurn had killed at least 15 men, though he'd never been convicted of murder. He was smart, ruthless, and creative. Capone turned from the window. "No, I don't want you to pay him a visit. I want you to send him a message, but not with bullets. Bullets make martyrs. Bullets bring cops and newspapers and federal agents. We just survived that mess with Jaime Weiss. I don't need more heat." "Then what do you want me to do?" Capone smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant smile. "I want you to make Vinnie Marcello understand that when you do business in my city, you play by my rules. I want him humiliated. I want him broken. And I want every other club owner in Chicago to hear about what happens when you try to cut Al Capone out of a deal." McGurn waited. He knew Capone well enough to know that when the boss got that look in his eyes, he already had a plan. "The Golden Door's on State Street, right?" Capone asked. "State and Division. Old building? Pre-1900 construction?" "I think so. Why?" Capone walked back to his desk and pressed a button on his intercom. A moment later, his secretary's voice crackled through. "Yes, Mr. Capone? Get me Frank Nitti. Tell him I need him here in 15 minutes. Frank, the enforcer. Nitti arrived in 12 minutes. At 41, Nitti was Capone's most trusted advisor, less flamboyant than McGurn, but infinitely more intelligent. Nitti understood how Chicago worked, the politicians, the unions, the building inspectors, the city engineers. Where McGurn solved problems with Thompson submachine guns, Nitti solved them with briefcases full of cash and ledgers full of favors owed. "Frank," Capone said as Nitti entered the office, "tell me about Chicago's sewer system." Nitti raised an eyebrow. "The sewer system?" "Specifically the sewers on State Street, old building built in the 1890s. How do those connections work?" Nitti thought for a moment. "Most buildings from that era connect to the main sewer lines through lateral pipes, clay pipes usually about 6 inches in diameter. They run from the building's basement to the main line under the street. And if someone wanted to reverse the flow in one of those lateral pipes?" Nitti's eyes widened as he understood what Capone was suggesting. "You'd need access to the main line and a pump, maybe a portable pump system. It's theoretically possible, but what? But it would take planning. You'd need city engineering documents to know where the connections are. You'd need equipment, and you'd need to do it at night when no one's watching." Capone looked at McGurn. "Can we get the engineering documents?" "I know a guy in the city engineer's office," McGurn said. "He owes me from that thing in 25. He'll get us whatever blueprints we need." "Good." Capone turned back to Nitti. "I want you to arrange everything. I want it done this Saturday night. Marcello's club is always packed on Saturday. That's his biggest night. I want his beautiful club, his fancy jazz lounge, his elegant speakeasy. I want it all flooded with sewage at midnight, right when the place is fullest." Nitti nodded slowly. "It'll cost money. Equipment rental, bribes for the night crew who'll see us working, payoffs to make sure no cops investigate." And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Much? $5,000, maybe 6. Capone laughed. "Marcello's trying to save $300 a week by cutting me out. I'm going to spend $6,000 to teach him a lesson. That's called making an investment in respect." March 17, 1927, 2:30 a.m. Mickey Callahan climbed down a ladder into Chicago's main sewer line beneath State Street, carrying a waterproof flashlight and trying not to breathe through his nose. Mickey was 32 years old, a former city engineer who'd been fired in 1925 for accepting bribes. Now he worked for Frank Nitti, doing jobs that required technical expertise and moral flexibility. The sewer tunnel was 7 feet tall and 10 feet wide, a brick-lined passage that carried Chicago's waste to the treatment plants on the south side. Water flowed ankle-deep through the center channel, and the smell was indescribable, a mixture of human waste, industrial chemicals, and decomposition that made Mickey's eyes water despite the handkerchief tied around his face. Behind Mickey came 2 of McGurn's men, Dominic the Ox Mazzano, a 250-pound enforcer who could bend iron pipes with his bare hands, and Freddie Lombardi, a skinny kid who was good with tools and didn't ask questions. "This is it," Mickey said, shining his flashlight on a junction where a smaller pipe entered the main tunnel. According to the city engineering documents that McGurn had obtained, this 6-inch clay lateral pipe connected directly to the Golden Door's basement drainage system. Mickey consulted the blueprint spread out on a wooden plank he'd placed across the water channel. "The building's main drain ties into this lateral about 15 feet in. Everything from the club, toilets, sinks, floor drains, it all flows through this one pipe into the main sewer." "So if we pump sewage backward through this pipe," Dominic said slowly, working through the logic, "it'll come up through all those drains in the club?" "Exactly," Mickey confirmed. "Basic hydraulics. Gravity normally pulls the waste down and out, but if we create enough pressure going the opposite direction, we can force it back up into the building. The toilets will overflow first, then the sinks, then the floor drains." Freddie grinned. "That's beautiful. That's like art." They'd brought equipment, a portable pump powered by a small gasoline engine, 50 feet of rubber hose, and sandbags to create a temporary dam in the main sewer line. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. They'd dam up the main flow to create a reservoir of sewage, attach the pump to the lateral pipe, and force thousands of gallons of raw waste back up into the Golden Door. "How long to set it up?" Dominic asked. Mickey checked his pocket watch. 3 hours, maybe 4. We need to build the dam first, get the pump primed, test the pressure. Nitty wants this done Saturday night at midnight, which gives us 3 days to prepare. Why midnight? Because that's when the club's packed, maximum humiliation, every society dame and gangster in Chicago watching sewage explode out of the toilets. They worked through the night, building their dam from sandbags and wooden planks, positioning the pump, running hoses. By 6 a.m., as the city above them began to wake, they'd completed the setup. The pump sat, silent and ready, its hose connected to the Golden Door's lateral pipe, waiting for Saturday night. Meanwhile, 4 blocks away at the Golden Door, Vinnie Marcello was having the best week of his professional life. The Canadian whiskey had arrived Wednesday morning, 12 cases of premium stuff that his customers loved. Thursday night's receipts had been up 15% because people were actually enjoying their drinks instead of choking down Capone's industrial-grade rot gut. Friday afternoon, Vinnie stood in his office counting money and feeling proud of himself. He'd stood up to Al Capone, and nothing bad had happened. No threats, no violence, no retaliation. Maybe Capone didn't care about one small club. Maybe the great Al Capone had bigger problems than Vinnie Marcello. "Boss, we got a weird situation," Tommy Chen said, poking his head into the office. "What kind of situation?" "City workers, outside. They say they're doing sewer maintenance." Vinnie walked to the window and looked down at State Street. Sure enough, there was a city truck parked at the curb, and 3 men in work clothes had opened a manhole cover. One of them, a big guy with arms like tree trunks, was directing the others. "Did they show ID?" Vinnie asked. "Yeah, city permits, work orders, everything looked legit." Vinnie shrugged. "Then let them work. Probably just routine maintenance." If Vinnie had walked downstairs and actually examined those work permits, he might have noticed they were forgeries. If he'd asked the workers specific questions about their assignment, he might have realized they were far too nervous to be legitimate city employees. If he'd called the city engineer's office to verify the work order, he would have discovered no maintenance was scheduled for State Street. But Vinnie didn't do any of those things. He went back to counting his money, planning Saturday night's menu, and feeling pleased with his independence. Outside his window, Dominic, Freddie, and Mickey climbed back down into the sewer to make final preparations. March the 19th, 1927, 11:47 p.m. The Golden Door was at its absolute peak. Every table on the second floor was occupied, and the third-floor speakeasy was packed with 200 people, stockbrokers, politicians, newspapermen, their wives and mistresses, all of them dressed in their finest, drinking Canadian whiskey and listening to a 7-piece jazz band led by Jelly Roll Morton himself. Vinnie moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting compliments on the improved quality of the drinks. He felt invincible. Days had passed since he'd cut ties with Capone, and nothing had happened. He'd worried for nothing. At 11:50 p.m., in the sewer tunnel beneath State Street, Mickey Callahan started the pump. The small gasoline engine coughed to life, and the pump began forcing sewage backward through the lateral pipe into the Golden Door's drainage system. At 11:52 p.m., in the men's room on the second floor, a stockbroker named William Peterson was washing his hands when he noticed something strange. The water in the sink was draining very slowly, almost backing up. He frowned, finished drying his hands, and went back to his table. At 11:55 p.m., the pressure in the pipes reached critical levels. In the basement, where Vinnie stored his expensive Canadian whiskey, a floor drain began to gurgle. At 11:58 p.m., Tommy Chen was behind the bar when he heard an odd sound. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. A deep, rumbling groan coming from the pipes behind the walls. At midnight exactly, every toilet in the Golden Door exploded. Not figuratively, literally exploded. Geysers of raw sewage shot up from every bathroom on every floor, fountaining 6 feet into the air. Sinks overflowed, floor drains erupted. Within 30 seconds, sewage was pouring across the bathrooms, flooding into the hallways, cascading down the stairs. The smell hit first, a wave of stench so overwhelming that people started gagging immediately. Then came the realization of what was happening. Screams erupted from the women's bathroom as raw sewage flooded across the marble floor. Men came running out of the men's room, their shoes soaked in filth. On the third floor, the speakeasy descended into chaos. People stampeded toward the stairs, slipping on the sewage that was now coating the floor. Women's elegant dresses dragged through the muck. Men in $1,000 suits abandoned their dignity and ran for the exits. Jelly Roll Morton's band stopped playing mid-song. The pianist stood up from his bench and stared in horror as brown water pooled around the piano's legs. Vinnie Marcello stood frozen in the center of his club, watching his dream dissolve into a nightmare of sewage and screaming customers. The flood was relentless, gallons upon gallons of waste pouring up from the basement, spreading across every floor, ruining everything it touched. "Shut off the water!" Vinnie screamed at Tommy. "It's not water, boss!" Tommy yelled back. "It's coming from the sewers." By 12:15 a.m., the Golden Door was empty. Every customer had fled into the street, their fine clothes ruined, their dignity shattered. Vinnie stood ankle-deep in sewage in what used to be his elegant jazz lounge, and he finally understood what had happened. Capone. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a plumbing failure. This was a message. In the sewer below, Mickey shut off the pump. The job was done. They'd pumped approximately 3,000 gallons of raw sewage into the Golden Door's drainage system. Enough to flood every floor, ruin every piece of furniture, contaminate every bottle of liquor, and make the building uninhabitable for weeks. The next morning, every newspaper in Chicago carried the story. "Elegant Nightclub flooded with sewage," read the Tribune's headline. The story included quotes from horrified customers, descriptions of ruined evening gowns, and speculation about faulty plumbing in old buildings. But everyone in Chicago's underworld knew the truth. They knew it wasn't faulty plumbing. They knew exactly who had done this and why, and they understood the message. Al Capone doesn't forget. Al Capone doesn't forgive. And if you try to cut Al Capone out of a deal, he'll destroy you in the most humiliating way possible. Vinnie Marcello spent $18,000 cleaning up the Golden Door. New floors, new furniture, new plumbing, new everything. The club reopened 6 weeks later, but it was never the same. The smell lingered, no matter how much disinfectant they used. Customers remembered what had happened and stayed away. Revenue dropped 60%. By August 1927, Vinnie was broke. He sold the Golden Door at a loss and left Chicago. The last anyone heard, he was washing dishes in a diner in Cleveland. Jack McGurn delivered the final message personally. He showed up at the club 3 days after the sewage flood, while Vinnie was supervising the cleanup. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. He just handed Vinnie an invoice for 20 cases of Capone's whiskey, delivered weekly, as before, at the old price. "Mr. Capone wanted me to remind you," McGurn said pleasantly, "that doing business in Chicago requires certain relationships, partnerships you might say. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. And partners don't betray partners." Vinnie signed the invoice with shaking hands. The story became legend in Chicago. For years afterward, whenever a club owner thought about buying from independent suppliers, someone would tell them about Vinnie Marcello and the Golden Door, about how Al Capone didn't need bullets to destroy you, about how there were worse things than getting shot. There was getting humiliated, getting broken, getting flooded with raw sewage at midnight in front of 200 witnesses. Al Capone proved something that night that most people miss. Power isn't just about violence, it's about creativity. It's about sending a message so memorable, so devastating, that nobody ever forgets it. Vinnie Marcello tried to ban Capone's whiskey. His club was flooded with raw sewage at midnight, and every nightclub owner in Chicago learned the same lesson. In Al Capone's Chicago, you didn't choose your suppliers chose you.